So we're recording now.
Uh-huh.
Michael doesn't know who our guest host for today is going to be. But guest host, let's take this step by step. First, you can unmute yourself in Zencastr. Okay, great. And then guest host, you can turn on your Zoom video when you're ready.
The four I thought it might be.
He was one of the four?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Oh, good. At least I was
We
on
did
the
it.
radar.
So, dear listeners, welcome to a very special edition of This One Goes to 11, where Michael is sitting on the other side of the proverbial table, and we are joined today by surprise guest host, Casey Morris. Casey, thank you for joining us today.
Hello, Michael.
Okay,
See you
see. Oh, see, I thought maybe you were going to go with Ashlyn just so that she could give me a hard time about Eddie Vedder's voice.
Sure.
And I was ready. I do have a quote ready to talk about Eddie Vedder's voice. Should I?
Oh, great.
Just in case she was the one who was going to be on here.
Keep
But
it.
Yeah, I will.
Cannot wait.
Well, I hope you're satisfied with our guest for today, Michael. I've been excited about it.
I'm very satisfied. I feel good about this conversation.
Very good. Okay. So, listeners, if you didn't listen to our first very special episode where I presented my second perfect album on the pod, I talked about A Ghost Is Born with our dear friend Evan Sawdy and Michael, and was put through my paces to prove that album's perfection. And I think I did a pretty good job. I'm going to go ahead and say that. But today, Michael is going to be doing the same thing, presenting his second perfect album on the pod. And Casey and I will be assessing his job. And today's going to be kind of a hardball day. Like we're not going to go easy. We're not going to go easy on people, especially you, Michael.
Let me just say, Michael, thank you for wearing flannel, because I would have given you so much shit.
You have to.
This is how I know this is going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, I am also wearing a Nirvana shirt underneath it, but I feel
doesn't make sense.
No, it does. I feel it's appropriate because I think they did towards the end. They sort of made some things up, and Kurt's death really affected Eddie quite a bit. So
yeah.
I mean, I think it would be really weird if Kurt Cobain were alive today. Have you ever seen them do those like? They've done like those image generation things of what art will look like, and it's it's weird, but no, they made up towards the end, so I feel good about this combination.
I would have been shaking in my boots a little bit more if you had wore, say, a Fugazi shirt underneath. I would have been.
I like that though, too.
Crap! Okay.
That would have been a good one. That would have been a good one.
Yeah,
you weren't quite prepared for that. Okay, well, before we get too deep, Michael, just for the edification of our listeners, please tell us, what album hath thou brought before the This One Goes to 11 tribunal today?
I hath brought the sophomore effort by a little-known band from Seattle, though technically from a few different states, Pearl Jam, and that album is called Verses, though some editions of the album that came out did not have that title printed on it because there was originally another title it was going to be called. So I actually am proud to say I owned one of the copies that did not say Verses on it. So,
oh, wow. Okay. Well, listen, you didn't do points for my case that I did, so I'm going to go qualitative with you as well. No points today. We're gonna see how the qualitative case is built. Save that reveal on if you know the original name of the album though, because that may or may not be in our trivia section.
All right. Okay.
But before we get to that, we have to do, it is everyone's favorite segment, and so we'd be remiss not to do it even under these special circumstances. And I'm going to be doing a very special edition of that. What is everyone's favorite segment, Michael?
It is called Beginner's Guide to Pearl Jam's Verses in 60 Seconds.
Yes, it is. And I am shouldering the load today, going to try to condense this story into 60 seconds. And you'll be assessing how I do. Casey will be our timekeeper today. So, Casey, do you have a minute on the clock for me?
I do.
Okay, ready? Let's get this thing started. You can count me down, all right?
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
It's been very nearly 34 years since the band that would become Pearl Jam played their first show together at the Off-Ramp Cafe in Seattle, Washington under the name Mookie Blaylock, a basketball player from the era admired by charter Pearl Jam members, guitarists Stone Gossard and Mike McCready, bassist Jeff Ament, and of course, Big Daddy on guitar and lead vocals, Edward Vedder. The non-Vedder founders of the band were all deeply involved in the then nascent, now legendary grunge movement percolating in Seattle. Once Vedder decamped from San Diego to join up, they wasted little time getting into the studio and laying down their triumphant debut, 10. While slow to sell at first, 10 eventually blasted off among listeners, reaching number 2 on the Billboard charts. Versus, the band's sophomore effort, saw them begin to process the classic rock band quandary of balancing their surging popularity with the expectations from myriad commercial and musical forces pressing down from every direction.
10 seconds.
Then came the war with Ticketmaster and the refusal to make music videos, all manifestations of the band's unerring dedication to authenticity that made them one of the most important American rock bands of the 90s, and one might argue, of all time.
All right. All right.
You got it in there.
Pretty close. Pretty close.
That's good. Yeah, that was good. Yeah.
Thank you. So, okay. There's my effort, Michael. Mm-hmm. Tell me, and Casey, you can weigh in on how you think I did, being the character witness for Pearl Jam that we've brought aboard. Give me a little assessment. How did I do condensing the band down into 60 seconds?
Yeah, I think that it's a lot. I'm glad that you stuck to like the beginning, because I think if you were to try and go post verses, you never would have squeezed it all in a minute.
Right.
I'm going to give you 5 out of 5 drummers.
5 out of 5 drummers.
Since the band had 5 different drummers at any point, I'm giving you all 5 of them.
Excellent.
Even Matt Chamberlain only lasted for like a hot second.
Yeah, it really was a blip. It was a blip on the radar. Casey, do you agree? How did I do? Anything that I could have done better?
Time is a flat circle. And being linear just is not as cool these days. But no, yeah, I think that you hit all the big ones. I don't remember you bringing up, the band previous to Pearl Jam.
That's a good point.
I'm trying to filter the things I'm saying because they might be clues to things. So,
things
anyway,
are coming up later.
But the one thing that popped out to me first was I don't remember reading about Vedder actually contributing on guitar in the very early instances of. I know he did on mixtapes that he passed around.
Yeah.
When he was pitching songs to bands, but I don't think he actually played guitar. But then he does. We see him play guitar in the last 15, 20 years or so.
He didn't really start on guitar until Vitology was when he started playing rhythm guitar primarily. But because in those early shows he was too busy taking his microphone and lassoing it up to the scaffolding so that he could climb up and then jump down on top of the audience. He was a little busy in those early years when they performed.
He was laying the ground. He was laying groundwork.
Fair criticism of this, and I think more it was more in the kind of grander sense anyway that he's been known to pick up a guitar in the intervening years is kind of how
I was really refreshed to not hear the whole like Pearl Jam coming from a psychedelic. What was the whole thing? It was a jam,
like someone's grandmother's some grandmother's psychedelic jam or something like that,
which is usually in the like first couple sentences of a bio I've heard. So,
that one seemed to lack support. Any kind of really dependable story around why they're called Pearl Jam, but it is better than Mookie Blaylock. I think this
is true.
It's much better. Okay, cool. So I think it's a good entree. There's a lot to talk about when it comes to Pearl Jam, and also just a lot when it comes to you and Pearl Jam, Michael. I mean, going back as we've known each other probably close to 12 years now, maybe. So it's one of the bands that I most closely associate with you. So I'm really excited to hear about, the origins of this love and why Pearl Jam, why this specific band. So to that end, we are going to give you a 5-minute opening statement period, and it's a soft 5 minutes. I'm not going to cut you off, but this is going to be your first opportunity to really convince me and Casey why you think this album in particular is perfect. Do you feel prepared for that?
I do feel prepared.
Okay, great. Well, then without further ado, we're going to open up the floor to your opening statement.
All right. Justice Esselman, Justice Morris, I stand before you here today, a 90s child. Born in 1979, the 1990s was the decade when I really formulated my own identity and personality. It is also the decade of Seattle grunge, and there is no Seattle grunge band that has had more longevity, even veering into classic mainstream rock, than that of Pearl Jam, one of my heart bands, the band that allowed me to channel a lot of my adolescent angst and anger and frustration over not being understood into something more constructive, with music that really, no matter what the song is or the sort of tempo, always feels like it's propelling forward. And of course, Eddie Vedder's voice, which is somehow simultaneously soulful, gravelly, and yet razor sharp at times. I discovered them, strangely, at a pool party for my church handbell choir when I was in like junior high, I think, when I heard 10 for the first time. I think the real thing that drew me to the band was obviously the Jeremy video. A lot of really great visual storytelling within that, Vedder's performance within that, the sort of ambiguous ending, which created a lot of controversy for them. It felt to me like a sort of issue-driven story that was combined with really hard-rocking music along with just, I don't know, impressive visuals. Mm-hmm. And of course, they were a regular feature on the modern rock radio station in Central New York, K-Rock 100.9, especially the song Corduroy, which is arguably one of the top 10 Pearl Jam songs ever made. But for me, everything really clicked with their sophomore album, 1993's Verses. It's usually not the album that's talked about the most, but it has a lot more appeal for me. And maybe that's part of its appeal because I always seem to think it's cool to like things that are less popular. But I've always thought that it's their most cohesive offering where they were able to really channel a lot of their emotion into something purposeful. And the reason that I believe this album is perfect is because no other album they have made is a more satisfying and complete mission statement for this band. Everything about their philosophy, their ethics, their poetics, and even a sneak peek into some of their political inclinations, it's all here in this album. You've got the really hard-rockin', driving, guitar-centric songs about issues, for lack of a better word. A song, Glorify G, the song inspired by their drummer who happened to show up one day and said that he bought a gun. In fact, he's got two, and that's how the whole Vedder's critique of guns within America comes out into a rock song. WMA, a song about racial injustice and police brutality at a time when that really wasn't a mainstream issue or something that people were giving any sort of credence to. And even a song like Blood, where Vedder just sort of rages at the deleterious effects of the media. And I mean, come on. Also, there's a song on there called Dissident. How many musical artists do you know have written songs about political cowardice and giving up someone they've been like hiding away from authorities? But at the same time, it also encapsulates the softer lyrical side of Pearl Jam, where they're sort of contemplating mortality and human existence. Elderly woman behind the counter in a small town. It feels like a end of the night sing-along at a bar about growing old and looking back. The song Daughter, which also kind of feels like an issue song. It's the catchiest song about parental abuse that you'll ever encounter in your life. Also, something unique on this album is that he did start to write songs where he was not necessarily singing from his own perspective, but from those of female characters. In some ways, to me, Pearl Jam and this album Verses feel sort of like the grunge equivalent of Brecht, in that it is pleasing music with a social message behind it, except that the music's a little less populist entertainment and more gnarly melodic guitar rock. It really is the opposite of a sophomore slump, right? 10 was their breakout album, their sort of creation myth album, all sorts of like mythical stories about how it came to be and the stories behind the songs, but it feels a lot like stadium anthems to me. When I listen to it, it sounds like a lot of greatest hits. And it comes right before the sort of strange soup of Vitology and the identity crisis of No Code that would follow. But this is who they are as a band and who they would always be. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 against 1. 5 individuals banded together against one adversary. No other album they've made, no other album by any grunge band so clearly defines who they are, what they're about, and what music they will make for the next 30 plus years. And with that, I conclude my opening statement.
Oh, yes. It pleases the court. The court is pleased. Let me say,
very passionate,
very passionate. Yeah, we need powdered wigs. That's what we need.
That's what we'll spend our budget on, powdered wig.
Yeah. Okay. Next merch. So, during the last episode, little sidebar, Michael was wearing our first instance of merch, the T-shirt that we have made for us each. But I think we might need this one goes to 11 powdered wig, a branded powdered wig.
Is that where we want to invest our money? Really?
Listen,
we're an authority now.
We're an
authority.
A sterling opening statement, and no less than I would expect from you, Michael. And you know what? God damn, if handbells just don't keep coming back up every time we talk about something, it's ridiculous.
You talk to enough people who raised in Catholic environments, you're going to encounter a lot of handbells. That's all I gotta say.
Were you a handbells guy, Casey? Did you play handbells growing up?
No, thank God.
Hey, they were fun. You could do really cool things with them. You could
it was the gloves for me. It was the gloves that I never understood why everyone had to wear gloves when they played.
So you protect, get your human oils on the bell. Don't want to ruin the bell. Eat away at it.
They were always white and perfect and Mickey Mousey, and it was just so weird.
I think if we start a band, we should probably call it Human Oils, though.
Human oil.
Can we workshop that? Let's workshop that.
I'm gonna put that one in the hopper. Okay, so really solid opening statement. So let's now move into the cross examination period of this. Casey and I have some questions that we came prepared with that we're going to kind of bounce off that opening statement to kind of really find out what the core of this album is and why it fits that perfect label so much. So Casey, why don't you lead us in with that first question that you and I discussed beforehand?
I'm just going to read it here. 10 was a major success and introduced Pearl Jam to the world. What were the unique pressures the band was facing during the recording process of Versus?
I mean, I think there's the usual thing of, if you have a really successful first album, there's that pressure for it to be bigger than your first album, which I mean, technically it wasn't. If you're judging it based off of album sales, it wasn't. Although I think most of the band members have said that they were real proud of what they made on Versus, even with one major exception, that being the lead singer. And I mean, I think there was that the sort of they really exploded out of nowhere. Also, I mean, no one really knew the band, and I'll save it in case it's coming up in trivia, but no one really knew the band that a couple of the members came out of. But there was just so much hype around the movement with Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains all sort of existing at the same time. And I think that even though they probably didn't look at it as a competition, it had to have felt like, people were turning it into a competition. I mean, think about this past summer. I feel like the media was trying to make Beyonce and Taylor Swift go against each other with their dueling concerts. But, they both went to go see each other's movies when they came out. They were never in competition with each other. They were just doing their own thing. And I think that Eddie Vedder is someone who has always wanted to do his own thing. In fact, this whole band, frankly, when you see them perform, they do not look like they belong together. And frankly, a couple of them look like especially Stone Gossard. I love you, Stone, but I mean, he looks like a nerd, he does, straight up nerd. And I think that there's that pressure to represent the Seattle grunge scene, that pressure to top their first album, their pressure to have something important to say after exploding with, so many singles off that album. I remember the first time when I actually purchased the album and listened to it, obviously I knew Jeremy and Alive and Even Flow and Black. But then when I listened to it, I realized, oh wait, I've heard almost all of these songs at some point on a radio station or something like that. I mean, it just sounds all so recognizable. So how do you top that? How do you come up with something that's even better than that?
So I guess the question is, do you think this does top it? You think that it does, if we're going to look at this in a purely horse racing kind of way, are you of the opinion that this album is a better album than 10?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And 10 might have overall more better songs or more good songs, if you will, but when I say good, I think I mean more popular or more stadium anthems I used earlier.
Okay.
This album Versus doesn't have as many stadium anthems, I don't think, but it just feels like it's the music and the lyrics all feel more truthful to who they are. I mean, maybe part of it was also because on this album they went into the studio having written nothing. They came in and they recorded a song at a time and just, plowed through, and it was a rigorous process, and Eddie was definitely not a fan of the process, but I think what they came out with felt like something that they all worked on together. It wasn't just, Stone sending a tape of some songs to some guy in San Diego that he had never met before. This was them all in a room making something together and, creating this statement of what they would stand for.
Yeah. Yeah, I liked what you said about it being a mission statement, because it does sort of hits a lot of different marks. There's a diverse, like a diverse plate, if you will, a diverse platter of issues that are brought up. And I'll put this question to both of you. If we're going to look at it in that, like, I love being reductive, right? So of these three albums, 10, Verses, and Vitalogy, is your perception as Pearl Jam fans that 10 is generally considered the best of those three, or that there is a constant it kind of depends on who you are sort of situation, considering which one is the best of those three initial albums?
Do you mean personally, or what we think is their most successful, just in terms of how it was achieved?
Like public perception?
I guess a little bit of both, because Casey, I'd love to know what you believe is the best Pearl Jam album. And I would also love to know what you feel like the perception is of what the best Pearl Jam album.
I think the best I think the best Pearl Jam album was Vitalogy.
Great.
But I know that the world sees Pearl Jam's best albums in order. I think it goes 10 Verses, Vitalogy, but I think that the musicianship on the Verses and Vitalogy are really what show the band's strength, their skill, as songwriters, because most of these songs were collectively written. I mean, some members like Amit, he wrote a lot more songs than people realize. I think 10 is definitely, I guess you were kind of saying this, Michael, commercially, like, clearly a stronger album in terms of like
singles,
better, more accessible songs. But and they were aware of that, because some of the Vitalogy songs were written during the Verses recording process, but they knew that they were going to be those overplayed songs, on the radio. They had to spread it out.
Better Man was written during the Verses sessions, and Vedder was like, "This is too commercial. We know this is going to be a commercial success."
Yeah.
And
Brendan O'Brien said as much too, right? That it was basically a perfect pop rock song, kind of.
Yeah,
right.
It's a great song.
It is. So do you feel, Michael? Do you feel like this is a hot take that Verses is the one? Then, like, does that contribute to your case for its perfection, that it may be a little bit hip of a pick?
I mean, a little bit. Like, I don't know. I don't want to sound like that. I mean, I did mention it in my statement, the fact that it's less cool, so that makes it better. But, like, I mean, 10 to me, yes, it is publicly perceived to be their best album. It, to me, sounds overplayed now to me, and
sure.
I re-listened to it last night just to confirm that I still believed this. And listening to 10, it just sounded, the instrumentation on it sounded a little more hollow is not the right word, but it definitely it feels like a soup that you ate just after you finished cooking it. It hasn't had that time to sit and for all the ingredients to marry together. Like all the ingredients are great, but it has not stewified itself.
I think one of the biggest reasons for that is because they had not played publicly out that much. I mean, that album reached way more people than anyone had, actually sat in a space and listened to them. That's what's so amazing about 10. It had the reception it did without them actually playing live shows. I mean, and that was in a time where it's different today. Now that's common because you have social media and TikTok and stuff. But back then, I mean, that's how you got known. You played, you played out, right?
Yeah.
And they would have serious challenges with that in the years after this with the whole Ticketmaster brouhaha, right? That was one of the big
Yeah, they had lots of challenges. I mean, like Ticketmaster, but also then, I mean, after Versus, the thing about Vitology is when things start to, which I agree is also a pretty great album. It is also, to me, it's in the history of the band, it's when things start to go awry a little bit. It's because it's the first album where Eddie Vedder starts kind of pushing himself forward as an architect of the band in some ways, because Stone Gossard was the one writing most of the music on 10, and I think he sort of looked at himself as like the musical leader. But Vitology, like Eddie starts to sort of assert himself a little bit, and that's gonna, cause friction between band members later on. I mean, Vitology is still a great album though, so they managed to work through. It was like the beginnings of friction, not not a blow up or anything like that.
Let's talk a little bit about the grunge element to this, right? And you've shown your cards in previous conversation with me a little bit as to your opinions about that. And again, we're gonna put the what the fuck is a genre anyway warning ahead of this particular train of thought. But one of the things that I saw, one of the criticisms I saw in the ether about this particular album was that it didn't necessarily, for maybe what Pearl Jam, I guess this is the sellout question, right? Is Pearl Jam alternative in the strictest sense of the term? Like, were they alternative in the way that some other grunge bands were underground or alternative? Because I think that's a criticism I see floating around a lot, is that they weren't. And that was the thing Kurt said, right? Is that they weren't truly a grunge band because the guitars were too prominent, or the guitar solos were too prominent. So what's your take on their place in the grunge movement?
I think they're grunge by association, and that's it. Like, I mean, there's a lot. What does alternative even mean, right? I mean, like right. when your first album ends up going, multi-platinum. I think they're only grunge by association because they came out of Seattle, because their guitar sounded a little bit like some of the other bands that were coming out of Seattle. But ultimately, and I've said this before, I really don't think Pearl Jam is even a grunge band, frankly. Like, and I mean, Eddie Vedder's influences are like The Who is like a huge influence for him. Pete Townsend, especially. I think a lot of Mike McCready's guitar playing sounds a little more like Zeppelin to me, frankly. Like it is no surprise to me that Pearl Jam has easily shifted over to the classic rock radio stations, because it's kind of what they've always been making, frankly.
Yeah.
There's a great book that I do encourage both of you to read if you want to, or any of you dear listeners, if you want to dive more into the Pearl Jam ethos. Fairly recent, Stephen Hayden wrote a book called Long Road: Pearl Jam and the Soundtrack of a Generation, which is quite good in the way the story is told and the information that's provided. Much better than that other book that came out called 5 Against 1 by Q.
That was what I read when I was probably 13. And,
me too.
Yeah.
Does it suck?
I owe a lot to that book, though, because it gave me the history, and I went and literally spent every dime I ever made mowing lawns on every album she mentioned in the book.
Yeah.
So, I do like that book, but I'm sure,
See, people, this is why music journalism is important. It will continue to be.
Yeah.
And it's not that the book is terrible. It's just, it definitely takes a more gossipy tone or perspective. And also, the only band member that the author spoke to for that book was Dave Abbruzzese, or Abbruzzese, I'm not sure how you say the end of that, who at the time, who was no longer a member of the band at the time, and had been released from the band under not such great circumstances. So it's not. I wouldn't call it an objective take on Pearl Jam's history.
Okay. This might be a great opportunity for us to, before you can just cross off more trivia items that we could possibly ask you. Maybe we should just go ahead and move to the trivia section, get you some points, don't you think?
I don't know how we're gonna hold up there, Tyler.
I know. But at least it's gonna be fun for the listeners, okay? And I have a couple that maybe you may not have right off the top.
I have a couple that are coming to my mind that I might have to just spring at you.
Yeah. Okay. We have to.
I can name all 5 drummers if you want me to. If that's one of your questions, I can do it.
We'll get to that.
Okay. All right.
Don't worry. Okay.
Okay. All right.
So we've split our trivia section up into softballs and hardballs, and I'm going to be giving you the softballs, the meatballs, and then
many of these questions are multi-parters because we knew
we knew you couldn't.
we knew
we
we were up
beat you.
against gay, so.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm going to start with your softballs. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. Thus begins trivia section. Softball number 1. What was the original title of the album?
5 Against 1.
5 Against 1. Easy. And like you mentioned, it was a last minute decision to change it to verses, right? And so there were a good deal of already printed copies of the album that had 5 Against 1 printed on it, right?
Yeah, I think some of the cassettes still said 5 Against 1. I don't think any of the CDs did. A lot of them just said nothing. They said Pearl Jam, which is my copy of it. Didn't
just
have
said
the
Pearl
word
Jam.
verses on it. Yeah, just Pearl Jam. That was it.
Oh, sweet. That's pretty cool. Okay. So there's 1 point for you. One trivia point. This one you may not get. The album cover notably features a goat peering down the barrel of a camera. Where did this particular goat live?
That was in Montana, I think.
Okay, I can give you half a point for that. Do you know the name of the town?
I don't know the name of the town, but I know that Jeff Ament took the photo because he's from Montana, and so I don't know if it's his hometown or I don't know. It was.
I couldn't actually say if it's his hometown. I'd need to cross-reference that, but you're correct. It's in Montana. It was in a town called Victor, Montana. So I'll give you
question: what kind of goat?
Oh, I don't fucking know.
Good, because it's an Angora goat.
Yeah. You clues it'll hang out around livestock.
Bonus.
So 1.5 points we're going to give you so far. All right, here's the last softball. The 2011 reissue of Versus included a live album recorded at a performance at what historic theater in Boston, Massachusetts?
So the Orpheum?
It is the Orpheum. Good.
Oh,
God damn, Michael. All right.
Well, because that's like a real popular release now. That was like a really good show that they,
I know. I was hoping I was going to catch you sleeping. All right. So we're moving on to the hardball questions. And Casey, why don't you serve up hardball number 1?
Okay. This is going to be hilariously hard for you. Which member was fired shortly after the Versus recording process? Who replaced them? And what other famous band was the new member associated with?
So they fired. Technically, they fired Dave Abruzzese after Vitalogy, not after Versus, because Dave Abruzzese plays on Vitalogy. So I don't know the exact year, but that's who they fired, replaced by Jack Irons, who plays on at least one song on Vitalogy. He plays on that stupid mop song at the end of Vitalogy. And Jack Irons used to be a drummer for Red Hot Chili Peppers, but he left the band after what's-his-name died of a heroin overdose.
Yeah, so I could be wrong. You got all of them right, obviously. But I know that we were saying before they recorded some of Vitalogy during the Verses. So I had read that that Jack picked up where they left off, but you might be right. Dave might have recorded more Vitalogy than we realized. But
I think he's the drummer on most of the Vitalogy tracks. You can sort of hear it. Jack Irons had a different way. He's the only drummer. Actually, no, I can tell now the difference between Dave Abruzzese, Jack Irons, and Matt Cameron when they're playing drums. They just have a different sound to them.
Yeah. Well, good. We'll give you 3 points. We'll give you 3 points for that one.
Okay.
Go ahead with the next hardball, Casey.
What is the name of the studio Versus was recorded at, and where is it located?
I don't know the name of the studio, but I do know. But I know it was in California because Eddie was real pissed off about the fact that. He was pissed off because it was so nice. Wherever he was recording it. I don't know the name of the studio though, but I do know it was in California.
Okay. The name of the the name of the studio is called The Site, and it is located in Nicasio, California, or Marin County.
Okay.
Marin County. Yeah. And it apparently was very, very lovely too.
Very lovely.
It's gorgeous. Yeah. Okay. What song?
Well, I'll give you half a point for that one since you got California.
What? Right. Whoa! Give me a third of a point.
Okay, fine. No points.
All right, fine.
What song featured on Versus is reportedly Vedder's most hated song to sing of the entire Pearl Jam discography?
I'm thinking of which songs off this album they almost never play. I feel like it's either Dissident or Leash. If only because those are the two that I feel like they don't play that often. I'm gonna go with Leash.
I'm sorry, but that's not correct. It's
Okay.
Glorified G.
Oh, really? He doesn't like singing that one? Maybe because, okay, can we talk about the fact that they wrote a song where they were literally insulting the drummer within the song and he had to play that every time that they did that live? Like, that's kind of screwed up.
It is.
It is Glorified G. It is Glorified G.
Yeah. That's the one.
Well, this is pretty. I'm proud of how we did, Casey. We did pretty
I'm
good.
glad we got at least one, two. That because I mean, like,
Yeah.
Michael, you know your shit, okay? Like, you know your stuff. All right?
He does. He does.
And I can say that without. It's really because I'm more of a Soundgarden fan. Okay,
Right.
Pearl Jam. It's a hobby for me. It's not really my passion.
No diehard. That's fair. Well, I think this is a great opportunity for us to listen to a little bit of Pearl Jam. Then, shall we? Michael, tell us, what have you chosen as your standout track from the album?
I've chosen a track that we haven't talked about yet at all, which I'm kind of excited about. That way we have no repeat content on this episode. I think the standout track from this album is Rearview Mirror.
Yes. Okay, say no more. We're going to listen to it. If you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, you're about to hear the whole song. And if you're listening on an Apple Podcast, you're just going to get a little taste of the song because money and capitalism and such. So we'll give it a listen, and then we'll be right back.